Hey everyone, welcome back to Engelbart Gaming. As you can probably tell, I'm still pretty sick today, but that's not stopping me from delivering the 4th episode in my occasional series, Amiga Arcade Ports, The Good, The Bad, and The Fugly. If you're new to this series, let me explain.
No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
The 16-bit Amiga computer has a reputation for terrible arcade ports, but if you think they're all bad,
well, you're wrong!
You've got some good ones, some bad ones, and some really f***ing ugly ones. In this series, I take a look at one of each. Today I've got an all Irem special episode for you. I'll be showing you and telling you about the Amiga versions of R-Type, Vigilante, and Ninja Spirit, which, uncoincidentally, are the Good, Bad, and Fugly games respectively. I'm feeling too rough to bore you with a longer intro today, so let's get on with it. Irem's R-Type was a genre-defining game when it launched in arcades in 1987. The shoot-'em-up, or shmup, was a growing genre that would come to dominate the early part of the 16-bit era. R-Type, along with Gradius, paved the way for so many games that would follow, and R-Type is deservedly a classic. A giant of the genre, if you will. The arcade version looked pretty good for when it came out, sounded okay, and played pretty well, as long as memorizing where enemies show up was a style of gameplay that jived with you. In the US, the arcade cabinet of R-Type was distributed by Nintendo, believe it or not. Now, R-Type was really big in the UK, so gamers in the microcomputer scene on that side of the pond were pretty excited to get home ports of it for devices like the C64 and Amiga. And Amiga R-Type is a pretty successful port overall, but not entirely. So the story of how Amiga R-Type came to be is an interesting one in itself and worth telling. I'll be quick. There was a little company called Factor 5 in Germany, who would later become famous for titles like the Turrican games and the Rogue Squadron Star Wars titles. Anyway, Factor 5 had developed an original shmup for the Amiga and C64 called Catechus. Catechus was pretty similar to R-Type. Activision was a big publisher in Europe during this time, and Activision Europe, who owned the rights to R-Type, threatened Factor 5, giving them two options. Activision would sue Factor 5 over Catechus' similarity to R-Type, or Activision would let Factor 5 off if it agreed to develop the Amiga version of R-Type. Factor 5, of course, agreed, and a while later, in 1989, we got the Amiga version of R-Type. Amiga R-Type looks, sounds, and plays pretty well. It's not a one-for-one match to the arcade version and is missing some stuff that we'll talk about now. First up, all the parallax scrolling from the arcade version is gone, which is a shame since the Amiga could have handled it, but at the expense of reduced colors. Let's also note that while the arcade version has parallax, it is weird with the background layers usually scrolling faster than the foreground layers in this game. Now on the Amiga, there's an awesome, original piece of music that plays on the title screen which was written by Chris Hulsbeck, but he didn't do the in-game music. That was by Darius Zenda. The in-game music is decent, but the samples used give it a much different flavor from the arcade original. Still, other than the title song, all of the music is correct and plays at the right time in the right level. Something that was definitely not a given in computer ports of the era. As far as gameplay goes, Factor 5 did a pretty bang-up job on the Amiga R-Type. It definitely feels like the arcade game, even if some things are a little off, namely a little bit of collision detection that isn't quite right with some of the weapons, and a lot of the multi-segment enemies are made of fewer components, and we might not see as many of them on screen at once, especially in the 5th stage. The one annoying thing is that games on the Amiga, despite the fact that it could read multiple buttons, generally were made to work with single-button Atari 2600 style joysticks. So in this game you shoot with the fire button, and you do your force launching and recalling with the spacebar. If you're playing it via emulation these days, it's no big deal since you could just map the spacebar to a gamepad button, but it was kind of a pain on real hardware. Amiga R-Type is a good port. It's not as good as the PC Engine / TurboGrafx version, but it's not very far below it either. On the Amiga, we're missing some backgrounds present in the PCE / Turbo version, but at least it doesn't have any of the annoying vertical scrolling to see the tops and bottom of the stages which is present in that one. Now, I won't call the Amiga version the best contemporary version of R-Type, but it definitely is a good one and worth trying out. Give it a shot, no pun intended. Oh boy, okay. Vigilante was sort of an unofficial follow-up to Irem's earlier Kung Fu Master, aka Spartan X. Vigilante arrived in the arcades in 1988, and looked and sounded decent for the time it came out, but it was a quarter-munching maniac designed to separate players from as much of their money as possible with very little they could do about it. It was fun-ish for a few minutes while the gameplay is reasonable in the first couple of levels, but it's kind of all downhill once you reach the level 2 bosses. Vigilante is unlikely to be anyone's favorite arcade title, but if you have fond memories of playing it growing up, well, you may be a little more forgiving toward it, and hey, that's fine, I understand. Now, Vigilante came out on the Amiga and other computers in 1989. You know we're in bad shape here since this one was published by US Gold, noted purveyors of digital crap. They often farmed out development duties of arcade ports to, tier techs. But not so this time. Amiga Vigilante was made by, Emerald Software. And are we sure that Emerald Software isn't a pseudonym for tier techs? Because Amiga Vigilante is complete trash. It looks meh, it sounds bad, and it plays worse. First, your character's walking speed is unbelievably slow. Does he have some kind of disease, or is he recovering from surgery or something? The overall graphics are kinda tolerable, even though the style is clearly much different from the arcade original. And as far as sound goes, the effects are annoying, and we get one song that just loops through the entire game. And it's a happy, bouncy, silly song that doesn't in any way remotely fit the gameplay. Oh, and the gameplay? It's hard to imagine anyone screwing up Vigilante more than Emerald Software did here. So remember the vast majority of Amiga games used a single-button joystick like I mentioned before? Well, Vigilante shoehorns punching, kicking, and jumping into a single-button control, and the controls are condensed badly. You have to hold a direction and press the button to kick. You have to hold up to jump. Jumping and pressing forward or backward will automatically do a jump kick. Pressing forward down and a button does a ground kick. And holding down that way without the button does punches with hilariously short reach that won't hit any enemies. If all that sounds confusing, don't worry, it's much worse in real life while you're playing. On the plus side, unlike the other games in this video, Vigilante on the Amiga retains the parallax scrolling of the arcade original, which is really about the only positive thing I can say here. The gameplay is just truly atrocious. Amiga Vigilante is a real stinker, and I can't picture anyone enjoying this. The best way to play Vigilante back then was on the PC Engine / TurboGrafx 16, which looked really close to the arcade original with higher contrast colors and less ridiculous enemies. It's no classic on NEC system either, but it's by far the best way to play the game. Avoid Amiga Vigilante unless you feel the burning need for self-flagellation for some reason. Here's our Fugly game of the episode, Ninja Spirit. Irem launched the arcade version of Ninja Spirit in 1988. I covered the arcade and PCE / turbo versions of the game in my last video. If you want to see a complete gameplay comparison of both, there it is. Anywho, Ninja Spirit looks like an action platformer, but plays a little bit more like a super intense shooter, and there's nothing else quite like it from that era. Some of the levels will make you think that this is an awesome classic game. Others are so ridiculously unfair and overly difficult, they'll make you wonder what drugs the designers and developers were on. The turbo version has reduced difficulty to make the game a little more enjoyable to mere humans, and is the best contemporary way we had of playing Ninja Spirit at home. Still, Ninja Spirit also found its way to the home computers of the era. It was published by Activision and developed by a small team at Images designed for the Amiga. As you can see here, it's not a looker. The parallax scrolling is gone, the frame rate is embarrassingly low, and the whole thing is the very definition of the word choppy. Still, from a gameplay standpoint, they managed to retain a lot of what made the original game interesting. All of the arcade levels are here, though some parts have been truncated, and in some cases they shrunk the scope of the levels. What do I mean exactly by that? Well, Stage 2 in the forest, for example, has no vertical scrolling at all on the Amiga version, and the mountain that you climb up during Stage 5 has no horizontal scrolling, it's vertical only. So both of those are big changes from the original. Ninja Spirit was a 3-button arcade game, so of course the controls suffer in the Amiga port. The fire button, along with a directional press, attacks. Up jumps, space changes weapons. The flashing weapon recommendations happen at different times in the stages than the arcade original, with different weapons. Also, this game is considerably easier and way more fair than the arcade version, but coming to grips with the gameplay and weird collision detection will take some time. You'll think I'm nuts for saying this game gets easier as you go along, but it really does, except for kinda maybe the last level with the stupid explosions. But if you stick with it long enough, you'll finish stage 1, and you'll see that the game just seems to continue to get easier until you get around the last stage or so. The music is sometimes awesome in Amiga Ninja Spirit. It has all the arcade music, but they decided to completely mess with what song plays at what level. I really hated when computer game devs did that. For instance, the level 3 song plays in level 1, the level 1 song plays in level 5, and so on. There are only a few places where it plays the correct song at the correct time. I have no idea why these developers who were porting an original game thought they knew better than the original creators where things should go. Ninja Spirit on the Amiga suffered from being another Atari ST port that was watered down for the lesser capabilities of that computer. Even so, while it may be pretty ugly, Amiga Ninja Spirit is still a pretty decent game once you get it all figured out. The biggest problem is just overcoming those weird controls where you won't attack unless you also press a direction. And while it's definitely not at the top of the list of things I want to see, it'd be interesting to see a modern Amiga homebrew dev do a fresh port to the Amiga with the superior tools that are available today. As it is, what we got in the old Amiga version of Ninja Spirit is a game that's so-so and playable, but really could have been so much better and much less ugly. So there we are, a look at more good, bad, and fugly Amiga arcade ports. R-Type is a good Amiga arcade port that could have been a little more ambitious. Vigilante is a bad arcade port that is little more than digital garbage, a curiosity that people like me will show you in videos like this. Ninja Spirit sure is fugly, with its low color, low frame rate, choppy scrolling, but once you get past that, it's actually kind of fun, despite being so very fugly. So what do you all think? Is this the first time you've seen these versions of these games? Did you play any of these versions or the other home computer ports of these games back when they were new and fresh? What are some of your favorite or least favorite Amiga arcade ports? Tell me all about them in the comments. That'll do it for this video, my retro gaming friends. If you enjoyed the video, please like and share it online somewhere. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you won't miss any of my videos. If you want to support the work that I do here and contribute to hardware reviews, you can do that on Patreon, Ko-fi, or here through YouTube memberships. With that, I'll say thanks for watching, and see me later.